In a world where everyone measures success by wealth, there are still a few hearts who build their lives on sincerity. Hassan was one of them, a simple builder whose dreams were made of dust and prayer. While others chased skyscrapers and fame, he built something the world often ignores: faith. His story isn't about bricks or money, but about a man who chose to keep his soul clean when everything around him was covered in greed. This is not just a story of construction. It's a story of conviction, of falling, rising, and finding divine light in honest work. The city roared with noise, horns, engines, and endless footsteps rushing through narrow streets. Among the crowd, a man named Hassan worked quietly under the sun. His hands were rough, his clothes covered with cement dust, but his heart carried something priceless: peace. Every morning before sunrise, he performed his prayers, kissed his wife Fatima's forehead, and set out to the construction site with a smile that no hardship could erase. Hassan was not famous, not rich, and not educated in grand schools. He was a builder, a simple man who believed that every wall he raised was a form of worship. His small toolbox, his old bicycle, and his sunburned skin told stories of patience. Around him worked others, men who laughed loudly, smoked carelessly, and often mocked his old-fashioned ideals. Among them were Rashid and Jamal, two clever builders who dreamed only of money. They called Hassan the poor saint behind his back, laughing at his devotion to small projects and his habit of donating part of his wages to orphans. Hassan didn't mind. He had learned long ago that dignity lives in silence. He preferred working on an old mosque in a forgotten part of the city rather than building luxury apartments that would never remember his name. The mosque was collapsing, cracked walls, leaking roof, and broken tiles. But when Hassan touched those walls, he felt a strange connection, as if the building whispered, "Bring me back to life." At home, Fatima, gentle and patient, would wait for him by the window. Her belly had started to show, the sign of a life growing within her. Sometimes worry clouded her face. "Is our fortune enough, Hassan?" she would ask softly. "You work so hard, yet we barely have anything left." Hassan would always smile, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "Fatima," he would reply, "our fortune doesn't come from the hands of men, but from the mercy of God. When we build for His sake, the reward is never small." Still, the nights were heavy. The sound of neighbors' laughter, families who had more lived better, sometimes pierced their quiet home. But Hassan never complained. He'd sit beside Fatima, place his hand on her stomach, and whisper, "One day, our child will walk into a world where honesty still matters. And that will be my legacy." Unknown to Hassan, his sincerity was about to be tested in ways he had never imagined. The city he loved would soon present him with a golden temptation, one that could change his life forever or destroy the peace he had built, brick by brick by brick. The sun was blazing over the construction site, and the smell of wet cement mixed with the dust that danced in the air. Hassan wiped the sweat off his brow and straightened his aching back. Around him, Rashid and Jamal were busy chatting about a grand new project they had just been offered, a luxury villa complex for a wealthy businessman. Their eyes sparkled with greed and ambition. "Hassan," Rashid called out, waving a glossy brochure. "Look at this!" "The man's paying 3 times the normal rate. We'll be working with imported marble, top designers, real prestige." He patted Hassan's shoulder with a grin. "Why waste your time on that broken old mosque when you could earn in 1 month what you make in a year?" Jamal chuckled. "Yeah, brother. People remember those who build palaces, not mosques. You'll get nothing but prayers, and prayers don't buy rice." Their laughter echoed, sharp and cutting. Hassan forced a polite smile, but his heart trembled. He had always believed in doing what pleased God, but the thought of earning enough to secure Fatima's future tugged at his conscience. He could almost see it. A proper house, new clothes for the baby, enough savings to stop living day to day. That night, Hassan couldn't sleep. Fatima rested peacefully beside him, her hand gently over her stomach. The room was silent except for the sound of the old ceiling fan turning lazily. Hassan stared at the cracked ceiling, lost in thought. What harm would it do? He wondered. Maybe if I take this project, I can finish the mosque later. At least my family won't suffer anymore. The next morning, Rashid and Jamal came again, more persuasive than ever. Hassan, the contractor asked about you, Rashid said. He knows you're skilled. If you join us, he'll make you supervisor. Big money, little effort. Hassan hesitated. The idea of being a supervisor, earning respect and a higher wage, tempted him deeply. But when he walked past the mosque that afternoon, the sight of it stopped him. The broken dome cast a long shadow over the ground, and inside, sunlight streamed through the cracks, forming shapes that looked almost divine. He stood there quietly, feeling as though the place was alive, waiting for him. At that moment, a voice inside him whispered, not loud, not commanding, just gentle. You started this for God. Will you leave it halfway for gold? Hassan's eyes welled up. He knelt on the dusty floor, pressing his hand to the cool marble. Forgive me, Lord, he whispered. Temptation is heavy, but my heart belongs here. He rose again, his decision made. When Rashid and Jamal came looking for him the next day, Hassan only smiled and said, You build your villas. I'll build my faith. They laughed as they left, but Hassan felt lighter. He didn't know it yet, but this choice, this quiet act of resistance, would define his life forever. Days turned into weeks, and the air around the half-finished mosque began to feel heavy, with both heat and hope. Hassan continued to work from dawn till dusk, his injured hand wrapped in cloth, his clothes soaked with sweat. Every swing of the hammer was a prayer, every drop of sweat a silent offering. The neighbors often stopped by, surprised that one man was still struggling to rebuild something everyone else had already given up on. Fatima, now 7 months pregnant, often brought him lunch in an old metal tiffin box. Her steps were slow, but her smile never faded. You shouldn't work so hard alone, she said softly one afternoon, watching him mix cement under the scorching sun. Hassan looked up at her with gentle eyes. This isn't my work, Fatima. It's our work. Yours, mine, and his. Every brick we lay here will be a shade of mercy over our heads one day. Still, deep inside, Fatima worried. Their savings were gone, the rent was due, and the baby's arrival drew closer every day. Sometimes she cried quietly at night, not wanting Hassan to hear. But he always knew. One evening, he took her hand in his, calloused fingers brushing against her soft skin. Listen, he whispered. My father once told me that when you build something for God, he builds your future for you. Maybe we can't see it now, but he never forgets a sincere heart. The next morning, as Hassan worked alone, an old man stopped near the mosque gate. He wore simple clothes, but had eyes that gleamed with wisdom. You're still building this place? The man asked. Hassan nodded humbly. Yes, sir. It's not much, but I do what I can. The old man smiled faintly. I used to pray here in my youth. It brings me joy to see someone caring for it again. Don't stop, son. God watches the ones who build in silence. His words filled Hassan's chest with renewed strength. He returned to his work with deeper purpose, whispering Bismillah under his breath before every task. The sound of his tools echoed through the empty mosque like a song of devotion. Meanwhile, Rashid and Jamal flaunted their new wealth, new phones, shiny bikes, and loud laughter. But their eyes, whenever they saw Hassan, flickered with something they couldn't name. Maybe confusion, maybe envy. Hassan, on the other hand, found peace even in his exhaustion. He felt that the more he gave, the more his heart filled. One late evening, as the sun dipped behind the minarets, Hassan stood on the scaffold, looking at the growing structure. The mosque was coming alive again. He smiled to himself and whispered, "O Lord, if this is all I ever build in my life, let it be enough." He didn't know that the biggest test of his sincerity was still waiting, a fall that would shake not only his. The morning was quiet, the sky painted in pale orange as the first rays of sunlight touched the mosque's unfinished dome. Hassan climbed up the wooden scaffold with slow, careful steps. He was tired, but content. The mosque was finally beginning to look alive again. Every brick, every patch of plaster carried the story of his struggle, his trust, his hope, his silent prayers. Down below, Fatima sat on a bench near the entrance, watching him work. Her face glowed with both pride and worry. "Be careful, Hassan," she called out softly. "You haven't eaten since dawn." Hassan smiled and waved his hand. "Just one more panel, Fatima. Then I'll come down." The wind picked up suddenly, carrying dust across the open courtyard. A loose wooden plank creaked beneath his feet. Hassan tried to steady himself, but before he could grab the beam, the wood gave way. A sharp crack echoed through the air, followed by a scream. Fatima's heart froze as she saw Hassan fall, his body crashing onto the rough floor below. Time stood still. The workers nearby rushed over, shouting his name. Dust filled the air. When it cleared, Hassan lay motionless, his leg twisted unnaturally, his face pale but conscious. "I'm okay," he whispered, trying to sit up, but pain surged through his body like fire. The men carried him to a clinic nearby, Fatima following, her eyes brimming with tears. The doctor's words were heavy. "A deep sprain and a possible fracture. He needs rest for weeks, maybe months." Fatima felt her world crumble. How would they survive with no income, with the baby due soon? Hassan looked at her from the bed, his voice trembling. "Fatima, I've failed you. I wanted to finish God's house, but now I can't even stand." She pressed his hand tightly. "No, Hassan, you haven't failed. Maybe this is just another test." But deep inside, fear gnawed at her heart. Nights grew longer, filled with silence and anxiety. Hassan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The sound of the mosque's distant construction haunted him. Rashid and Jamal had taken over to help, but their motive was profit, not prayer. He began to question everything. Was sincerity enough? He wondered. If God truly loved me, why did I fall? Why this pain, this helplessness? His heart, once full of peace, now wrestled with doubt. One evening, as Fatima helped him eat, Hassan spoke quietly. "Maybe I should have taken that villa job. At least we wouldn't be struggling like this." Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled faintly. "And would that money have bought peace for your heart?" Hassan looked away. For the first time, silence felt heavier than pain. Yet somewhere deep within that silence, a tiny spark of faith still flickered. Faint, but alive. He didn't know it yet, but that spark would soon reignite everything he stood for. The nights that followed Hassan's fall were filled with restlessness. The sound of rain tapping against the window mingled with the faint hum of the city outside. Fatima would often wake up to find Hassan sitting upright in bed, staring at the dark ceiling as if searching for answers written on it. His leg, wrapped in bandages, ached constantly. But the real pain came from somewhere deeper, from the quiet voice inside him that kept whispering, "You failed." Fatima tried her best to comfort him. She would bring him soup, massage his swollen ankle, and speak with gentle firmness. "Hassan, God doesn't abandon those who work for him. Maybe this is just a pause, not an ending." Hassan smiled weakly, but said nothing. His mind wandered back to the half-built mosque, the walls standing still without his hands guiding them. He felt like he had left his soul behind in that dusty courtyard. Days turned into weeks. The rent was overdue, the savings had run dry, and Fatima's due date was approaching fast. One afternoon, she found Hassan holding his prayer beads tightly, his lips moving, but no sound coming out. When she placed a hand on his shoulder, she felt his tears for the first time. "Fatima," he whispered, "maybe I was foolish. Maybe all this talk of sincerity was just pride. I thought I was building for God. But what if I was just building for myself?" Fatima knelt beside him. "Don't say that. You built because you believed. That belief is what God is testing now." Her voice trembled, but her conviction didn't. "Do you think faith is proven when everything is easy?" "No, Hassan. Faith is proven when everything falls apart and you still look up." Her words pierced through his heart like sunlight breaking through clouds. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. "You're right," he said softly. "Faith isn't about never falling. It's about getting up again." That night, for the first time in weeks, Hassan prayed with full concentration. He didn't ask for money, strength, or success. He only said, "O Lord, if this pain is part of your plan, then let it be. Just don't let my heart turn away." As he finished, he felt something shift within him, a strange calm, like cool water flowing over a burn. The next morning, when Fatima brought him breakfast, she noticed a change. His face, though pale, carried peace. "I can't sit here any longer," he said. "My leg will heal, but my spirit already has. I need to go back." "Back where?" she asked, startled. "To the mosque," he replied with a faint smile. "Even if I can't work, I'll sit there. I'll watch over it. That's where I belong." Fatima's eyes glistened. She knew this was not just recovery. It was resurrection of faith. Hassan had. The morning air was fresh when Hassan finally returned to the mosque. The sky was painted in gold, and the call to prayer echoed through the narrow streets like a gentle reminder that life always begins again. His leg was still weak, wrapped tightly in a bandage, and every step sent a dull ache through his bones. Yet, there was strength in his heart that no injury could suppress. Fatima walked beside him, one hand on her belly, the other carrying a flask of water. When Hassan reached the mosque courtyard, the sight broke him and healed him at the same time. The scaffolding still stood, half-finished walls surrounded by silence. Dust covered everything, as if time itself had stopped when he fell. He sat down on a pile of bricks, running his fingers over the rough surface. "I'm back," he whispered to himself. Within minutes, some of his fellow workers noticed him. Rashid and Jamal were among them, dressed neatly now, their faces glowing with the success of their new projects. Rashid raised an eyebrow. "You again, Hassan? Still chasing heaven while the rest of us are living it?" His words were sharp, but Hassan only smiled. "Maybe you're right," he said quietly. "But I'd rather live for heaven than die for greed. Ignoring their laughter, he stood and began sweeping the floor with slow, deliberate movements. Every stroke of the broom seemed to sweep away doubt and despair from his soul. Before long, a few old laborers joined him, men who respected his sincerity more than his strength. "You shouldn't be working in your condition," one of them said. Hassan looked up, his face calm. "If my hands can move, I can still serve." The sound of tools returned to the air, hammers striking nails, shovels hitting sand. Slowly, the mosque began to awaken again. The neighborhood children came by after school, watching curiously. Hassan smiled at them and said, "You see this? Every drop of sweat is an investment in faith. We're not just building a mosque, we're building a message." The children's eyes shone as they listened, and some even picked up small stones to help. By sunset, Hassan's shirt was soaked, his face streaked with dust, but his heart felt lighter than it had in months. He sat down to rest as Fatima approached with food. "You shouldn't push yourself so hard," she said gently. Hassan smiled, looking at the glowing mosque walls. "If I can still move, then I haven't lost." Pain is a teacher, Fatima. It reminds us that sincerity must sometimes bleed before it shines. That night, when he prayed in the half-finished hall, his voice trembled with gratitude. "O Lord," he whispered, "thank you for giving me another chance to serve." The echoes of his prayer filled the room like music. For the first time since his fall, Hassan didn't feel small. He felt chosen. What he didn't know was that this return would not only complete the mosque, it would complete his destiny. Months passed, and the once ruined mosque began to rise with new life. The broken dome was now being replaced with fresh marble. The cracked minaret stood tall again, and the faded calligraphy on the walls started to gleam under layers of gold and blue paint. Every corner of the mosque seemed to breathe again, as if it too had waited patiently for Hassan's return. Hassan, though still limping, worked tirelessly from dawn to dusk. He no longer counted hours or wages, only the blessings that came with each completed wall. The community began to notice. One by one, people started bringing him food, water, and supplies. The shopkeeper offered free cement bags, an old carpenter donated doors, and even the children came daily with small buckets of sand. What was once Hassan's lonely struggle had now become a movement of hearts. Fatima, who had recently given birth to a healthy baby boy, would sit near the entrance every afternoon, watching her husband with quiet pride. Sometimes, when Hassan took a break, he would cradle their child in his dusty arms and say softly, "When you grow up, my son, remember, what's built for God never collapses." As the final days of construction approached, excitement spread across the neighborhood. People cleaned the surrounding streets, painted walls, and hung banners for the mosque's grand reopening. For many, it wasn't just about architecture. It was about hope, unity, and the miracle of sincerity. One evening, as the sunset cast golden light over the new dome, Hassan stood at the highest step and gazed at what he and his small team had accomplished. His eyes filled with tears. The building wasn't just stone and paint anymore. It was faith made visible. He remembered the first day he had started, the ridicule from Rashid and Jamal, the pain of his fall, the doubts, the prayers, and Fatima's unwavering support. Every hardship had shaped this moment. When the first call to prayer echoed through the new speakers, it was unlike anything the people had heard before. The sound carried through the city, bouncing off rooftops, calling hearts home. The old and the young gathered inside, some crying openly, others bowing in deep gratitude. Hassan stood quietly in the back, too humble to take credit. Rashid and Jamal appeared too, their expressions unreadable. For a moment they looked around, ashamed of their earlier mockery. Rashid walked up to Hassan and said in a low voice, "You were right, brother. Money can build houses, but only sincerity builds hearts." Hassan smiled, his eyes glistening. "It's never too late to build the right thing," he replied. As the prayer began, Hassan bowed down on the cool marble floor, his forehead touching the ground he once bled on. A tear slipped down his cheek as he whispered, "Ya Allah, this is not my work. This is yours." The mosque was no longer just rebuilt. It was reborn, and so was he. The day of the mosque's inauguration arrived like a long-awaited dawn. The streets were decorated with lanterns. Fresh banners fluttered in the breeze, and the scent of rosewater filled the air. People from every corner of the city gathered. Men, women, and children, all dressed in their best clothes. It was not just a celebration of architecture, but of faith, perseverance, and unity. The mosque's dome reflected the morning sun like a crown of light. Hassan stood quietly at the side, his clothes clean for the first time in months, but his hands still carried faint traces of cement that even soap could not remove. Fatima, holding their infant son, stood a few feet away, pride glowing in her eyes. Her husband, once broken and doubted, now stood as a living proof that sincerity could turn dust into beauty. The event began with the sound of drums and prayers. Then, a respected cleric, Qiyai Rahman, arrived, a scholar known across the region for his wisdom and humility. The crowd made way for him as he entered the mosque. His white beard shimmered under the light, and his eyes were calm yet piercing. When he saw the newly built structure, he paused, touched the cool marble wall, and smiled. "This," he said softly, "was built with a heart that remembers God." After the prayer, Qiyai Rahman asked the crowd, "Who is the builder of this house?" The people turned and pointed toward Hassan. Embarrassed, Hassan stepped forward hesitantly, his head bowed. The Qiyai extended his hand and took Hassan's rough palms into his. "Son," he began, his voice trembling with emotion, "these hands are blessed. They have built not only a mosque, but a message for the world." The crowd listened in silence as the old scholar continued. Do you know what gives strength to a building? Not the cement, not the bricks. It is the intention behind them. A palace built with pride will one day fall, but a mosque built with sincerity will stand even when its stones are gone. Hassan's sincerity has turned this place into a sanctuary for angels. Tears welled up in Hassan's eyes. He had dreamed of finishing the mosque, but never imagined his name would be spoken with such honor. He looked at the crowd, the same people who once walked past him without notice, now clapping for him, their faces glowing with admiration. Yet deep inside, he felt no pride, only gratitude. When the applause faded, Hassan said softly, "This mosque was not built by me. I was just a tool. The real builder is the one who guided my heart when I wanted to give up." The Qiyai nodded approvingly. "And that, my son, is what true greatness looks like." As the call to prayer began again, Hassan looked toward the dome that gleamed in the sunlight. He realized something profound. The reward of sincerity is not fame or fortune, but the peace that fills your soul when you know you have served your Creator well. In the weeks after the mosque's inauguration, Hassan's life began to change in ways he never expected. What started as whispers in the neighborhood grew into stories told across the city. The story of the builder who refused gold but built for God. People who had never met Hassan spoke of him with admiration. Contractors, engineers, and even city officials came to see the mosque that had become a symbol of sincerity. One morning, as Hassan was finishing his prayer, a car stopped outside his small house. A man in a crisp suit stepped out, holding a folder. "Are you Hassan, the builder?" he asked respectfully. Hassan nodded, a bit uneasy. The man smiled. "My company has heard about your work. We're planning a new community project. Schools, hospitals, houses for the poor. We'd like you to oversee the construction." Hassan was stunned. "Me? But I'm just a small builder." The man shook his head. "You're not small. You're honest. That's what we need." When Hassan told Fatima the news, her eyes filled with tears. "See?" she whispered. "Didn't I tell you that God never forgets a sincere heart?" Hassan smiled, but his voice was humble. "Then we must never forget him either." In the following months, Hassan worked on several projects, each one guided by the same principle that rebuilt the mosque: faith before fortune. His workers noticed that he prayed before laying the first brick of every site, dedicating each project to a higher purpose. Slowly, people stopped calling him Hassan the Builder. They started calling him Hassan the Blessing. Even Rashid and Jamal, once blinded by greed, sought him out again. They found him at a construction site, supervising workers while sitting on an old chair. Rashid approached quietly. "Hassan," he said, "we've made money, but we lost peace. You have both. Teach us what we missed." Hassan looked up, smiled kindly, and said, "Peace doesn't come from what you build outside. It comes from what you build inside." The words struck them deeply. From that day, Rashid and Jamal began to change. They joined Hassan's new project, not for wealth, but to rebuild what they had lost: their integrity. Soon, the mosque that started it all became a community hub. It was no longer just a place of prayer, but of learning and service. Every week, people gathered there to discuss how to help the needy, how to educate orphans, and how to build cleaner neighborhoods. Hassan, who once doubted his worth, now guided others through example, never through pride. Yet despite the fame, he remained simple, the same man who wore dusty clothes and rode his old bicycle to work. When journalists asked him about his success, he only said, "I didn't build anything. God did. I just held the tools." And truly, his sincerity had become his reputation, and his reputation had become his blessing. Years passed, and the once young builder with rough hands and unshakable faith grew older. Hassan's hair had turned silver, but his heart remained strong. The mosque he built still stood at the heart of the city, its walls gleaming under the sun, its dome reflecting the stars at night. Every call to prayer echoed through the streets like a living memory of his journey. Children who hadn't been born when the mosque was rebuilt now ran through its courtyard, their laughter mingling with the rhythm of devotion. Hassan often came to sit on the same bench where Fatima once watched him work. His son, now a curious little boy with bright eyes, would climb onto his lap. "Father," he would ask, "is it true you built this mosque all by yourself?" Hassan would smile softly. "No, my son. I didn't build it alone. I had help from people, from prayers, and from the one who never let sincerity go to waste." The boy looked at this towering minaret, eyes wide with wonder. "Then will it last forever?" he asked. Hassan chuckled gently. "Maybe not the walls, but what was built here, the faith, the honesty, the love that will last longer than any stone. As he spoke, people often came to greet him, shopkeepers, scholars, and workers who once labored by his side. They treated him with respect, not as a wealthy man, but as a symbol of goodness. Hassan never accepted special seats or titles. He preferred sitting on the floor with everyone else. When people tried to praise him, he would always say, "Don't thank me. Thank the one who gave me the strength to stand when I had fallen." One evening, as the golden light of sunset filled the mosque, Hassan stood near the entrance and gazed at the dome. Fatima, standing beside him, whispered, "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Hassan nodded. "Yes," he said softly, "but not because of what we see, because of what we learned." She smiled. "And what did we learn?" "That sincerity is the most powerful foundation of all," he replied. "You can build towers that touch the sky, but if they lack sincerity, they will crumble. Yet a single act of pure intention can build something eternal." As the call to prayer began, Hassan joined the congregation. His knees ached, his back was stiff, but his heart was at peace. When he bowed in prayer, tears fell silently onto the carpet. He felt the same warmth he had felt years ago when he first laid the mosque's foundation. Outside, lamps flickered to life, illuminating the courtyard. People said later that the mosque seemed to glow that night brighter than ever before, as if the light within it had been born from Hassan's very soul. Hassan's story became a timeless reminder. True success isn't measured by what you earn, but by what you leave behind in the hearts of others. His mosque stood as more than a building. It was a living legacy of light,